You become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free. Actually, because they're having a hard time up there in Canada now, because as you know, with tariffs, everyone's coming into our country. We have more investment than we've ever had before, $17 trillion coming in.
In Washington, President Donald Trump unveiled his newest symbol of strength. Standing before military leaders, he introduced the Golden Dome, a missile defense shield he described as the most advanced in the world. The moment might have ended as a show of American power, but what caught attention was a remark about Canada. He revealed Ottawa had called to ask about joining the system. Trump's reply was blunt: become the 51st state and you get it for free. The comment was delivered with a mix of bravado and humor, but it revealed something deeper. It showed how Trump uses tariffs, defense deals, and rhetoric to remind allies that the United States holds the upper hand. Yet the very policies meant to project strength may be pushing those same allies to seek independence. Canada, more than any other neighbor, is beginning to chart its own path.
He wants to boast about territorial expansion, so of course the 51st state idea comes up. And sometimes you have to wonder if Donald Trump wants to be president of the United States in 2025 or 1825, because between tariffs and territorial expansion, these sound like the agenda of a president from the 19th century.
Just days before Trump's latest comments, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in New York to deliver a different kind of message. He argued that Canada has the resources and capacity to escape its reliance on the American market. With vast reserves of critical minerals, strong energy exports, and agriculture that feeds millions, Canada is not a dependent partner, but a nation with real leverage. Carney pointed to the network of free trade agreements Ottawa has signed with Europe, the United Kingdom, and most recently Indonesia. These deals, he argued, prove that Canada can build opportunities outside Washington's orbit. The contrast was clear. Trump leaned on old ideas of dominance, while Carney emphasized that Canada is capable of standing on its own and reducing its vulnerability to American tariffs.
That a tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people.
The challenge is real. On September 30, the Trump administration announced new tariffs, 10% on Canadian softwood lumber and 25% on kitchen cabinets and furniture, with the threat of rising to 50% in January 2026. According to U.S. trade statistics, about 80% of upholstered furniture sold in America is imported, and Canada is a key supplier of lumber. The impact is immediate for sawmills, exporters, and cross-border trade. Yet rather than bowing to pressure, Canada has used these shocks as fuel for diversification. The new comprehensive agreement with Indonesia opens doors in Southeast Asia. Investments in critical minerals, including a cobalt refinery in Ontario, supported by both provincial funding and U.S. defense contributions, show Ottawa is building new pillars of economic security. Trump's tariffs may bruise Canadian sectors in the short term, but they also accelerate the long-term shift away from overdependence on the United States. The larger consequence is that America risks alienating its closest partner. Trump believes reciprocal tariffs and blunt rhetoric will regenerate U.S. industry and attract investment. He has pointed to trillions in capital inflows and new auto and AI plants as proof of success. But the picture is more complicated. Allies like Canada now see tariffs not as temporary disputes, but as signs that Washington is no longer reliable. The language of a 51st state may sound like a joke to some, but for Canadians it reinforces the need to protect sovereignty and strengthen ties elsewhere. What began as an attempt to force Canada into line may instead leave the United States with a weaker North American partnership. In the effort to make America great, Trump's policies are creating space for Canada to grow more independent, and that shift may be one of the most significant backfires of his trade agenda.
Tonight, the man who has reshaped the world order, for better or worse, entered the history books, touching down at Stansted to become the first ever president to have the red carpet rolled out twice for a state visit.
President Donald Trump arrived in Britain this week with the kind of ceremony that few leaders ever received. He became the first American president to be granted a second state visit, complete with the red carpet, a helicopter ride into London, and the promise of a royal welcome at Windsor Castle. It should have been a triumph, a reminder of prestige and tradition.
It's a great honor. And this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before. But basically, I'm there also on trade.
Yet within minutes of his arrival, the story turned in a very different direction.
As Donald Trump arrives in London, so begins a charm offensive on an epic scale.
Protesters managed to project images of Trump with Jeffrey Epstein onto the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. What was supposed to be a symbol of respect and dignity became a global embarrassment. The trip was designed to showcase power and legitimacy. Instead, the opening act left an unforgettable stain. The president came to London seeking to shift the narrative away from domestic controversies and to bask in the splendor of Britain's monarchy. He spoke often of his friendship with King Charles and clearly believed that Windsor Castle, used for the first time as the centerpiece of a state visit, would elevate his image. The plan was simple: drown out criticism with pageantry. But optics are fragile. What people remember is not the lavish banquet or the guard of honor. They remember the projected images that spread instantly across social media. Instead of being portrayed as a statesman, Trump was mocked worldwide. It is striking that a leader who has built his political brand on control and dominance could see the narrative collapse so quickly. He can order tariffs that reshape world trade, but he could not stop a small projector from defining the moment. Beyond the ceremony, the trip carried serious business. The United Kingdom is looking to adjust its trade arrangement with the United States. Trump hinted that London might get a slightly better deal, but there were no clear commitments. Britain has been struggling with the ripple effects of Washington's reciprocal tariff policy, which applies rates of 10 to 50% on a wide range of imports. For UK exporters in sectors like steel and aluminum, the pressure is real. That is why British officials wanted this visit to produce something more concrete. Yet the most significant economic news of the week did not come from the White House at all. It came from Microsoft. The company announced a $30 billion investment in the United Kingdom, the single largest financial commitment it has ever made there. The funds will expand data centers and support an advanced artificial intelligence supercomputer. For the UK, this is not just symbolism. It is a tangible boost to infrastructure, innovation, and jobs. And for observers, it underscored an awkward truth. While Trump tried to dominate headlines with royal splendor, the lasting legacy of the visit may belong to a technology giant. By the time Air Force One departs, what will remain in the public memory is not the banquets or the photo opportunities. It will be the clash between the carefully staged theater of diplomacy and the raw disruption of a protester's projector. Britain may still push for trade relief, and the Microsoft deal will move forward regardless of political optics. But Trump's effort to reset his image abroad has been overshadowed. The visit was meant to be a charm offensive, proof of status and friendship. Instead, it showed how easily prestige can unravel. In the end, Windsor 2025 will not be remembered for the elegance of the monarchy. It will be remembered for how quickly ceremony gave way to humiliation, and how a simple beam of light managed to outshine the world's most powerful man.
Now, the US president says that he is ready to impose sanctions on Russia in order to end the war in Ukraine, but only if NATO members agree to massive tariffs on China.
The latest move from Washington has left many allies shaking their heads. President Donald Trump has called on Canada and NATO to impose tariffs of 50 to 100% on China and to cut off Russian oil imports. He linked these demands directly to the possibility of the United States finally imposing sanctions on Russia. This is a striking shift. Only weeks ago, the White House celebrated its reciprocal tariff strategy as the tool that would restore America's leverage. In reality, the sweeping tariff package introduced in early August has been costly at home and unpopular abroad. Allies such as Canada and the European Union have felt punished rather than protected. Canada, in particular, has become the center of attention. Ottawa had already moved against Chinese electric vehicles earlier this year, proving it could act decisively on its own. Yet Washington offered no recognition, treating Canada not as a trusted ally, but as another target of tariffs. At the same time, China is not standing still. Over the summer, Beijing tightened its cooperation with Russia, Iran, and North Korea. 2 weeks ago, India's participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Summit highlighted how the balance of power is shifting. For Washington, the hope was that tariffs would isolate China and weaken its influence. The opposite has happened.
Donald Trump had a disastrous summit with Putin in Alaska, and after he saw the Indian Prime Minister Modi go to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit that took place in Tianjin 2 weeks ago, which was clearly, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and India getting together to thumb their nose at Trump.
The SCO has given China a broader platform and a wider circle of partners, making Beijing more confident in pushing back against Western pressure. Trump's tariffs have not curbed China's reach. Instead, they have added urgency for China to build stronger alliances, leaving the United States searching for partners of its own. This is the backdrop against which Trump is now pressing Canada and NATO to carry the economic weight. The demands sound bold, but they reveal a deeper problem. For Europe, imposing tariffs as high as 100% on China would risk economic self-harm. China remains a top export destination, and European governments know that retaliation would follow immediately. For Canada, the situation is more complex. Ottawa already showed independence by applying heavy tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles earlier this year. That choice demonstrated that Canada can act without waiting for Washington's lead. Today, it gives Ottawa leverage. If Trump truly wants Canada on board, he cannot expect compliance without conditions. Canada holds a stronger hand than it often admits. It can refuse to be dragged into a wider tariff war unless the United States shows genuine respect for its role as an equal partner. Far from being a junior player, Canada is in a position to say no, or at least to insist on terms that protect its own interests. All of this is unfolding while NATO faces fresh security threats. In early September, 19 Russian drones crossed into Polish airspace, forcing Warsaw to call an Article 4 meeting. France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Denmark responded with fighter jets to strengthen the alliance's eastern flank. The United States, by contrast, stayed largely absent from this operation. Instead, Trump focused his energy on pressing allies to fight an economic battle with China. The contrast is striking. NATO is already engaged in defending its border, yet Washington is asking it to open a second front in trade. The result is a sense of division inside the alliance. Canada is caught between its obligations to the United States and its exposure to retaliation from China. Europe faces the same dilemma. Meanwhile, Beijing benefits from every sign of discord among Western partners. What was supposed to be a strategy to isolate adversaries has turned into a source of strain with allies. Trump's tariff gamble has backfired. Rather than strengthening America's hand, it has weakened trust inside NATO and forced Canada into a position where it can choose whether to cooperate at all.
Canadian officials, including Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, are in China advocating for the removal of tariffs on canola.
It is a very uncertain time, and we're hopeful to provide some certainty in this space sooner rather than later.
In early August, Beijing imposed a 75.8% anti-dumping duty on Canadian canola seed. Overnight, a $5 billion Canadian dollar trade stream was cut, and for farmers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the decision was devastating. Canola is not just a crop, it is the foundation of household income across the prairies and a key pillar of Canada's agricultural exports. By raising the tariff, China signaled that it believed it could hold the upper hand, using pressure on canola to force Canada to soften its own stance on electric vehicle tariffs. But has this strategy really worked? The reality suggests that China may eventually need to step back, because the cost of replacing Canadian canola is higher than expected. The first test came in Ottawa. On September 9, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a $370 million biofuel production incentive to help farmers cope with the shock. The plan included changes to Canada's clean fuel regulations, new marketing funds, and higher loan limits for producers. Saskatchewan's premier welcomed the measures and confirmed that provincial officials were exploring ways to expand renewable diesel blending. These adjustments matter because they create a domestic outlet for canola seed, oil, and meal, reducing immediate dependence on China. At the same time, Canadian exporters began redirecting shipments abroad. From January to July, Japan imported nearly 1 million tons of seed, the European Union close to 800,000, Mexico almost 500,000, and the United Arab Emirates more than 260,000. In parallel, the United States remained a reliable buyer, absorbing over 1 million tons of Canadian oil and nearly 2 million tons of meal. Step by step, Canada showed that it had tools to adapt and to cushion the loss of its largest customer. For Beijing, the challenge has been just as stark. Australia quickly appeared as the alternative, but most of its nearly 5 million tons of canola exports in the 2023-24 crop year were already contracted to Europe. Volumes available for China were limited, despite the advantage of closer shipping routes. India offered rapeseed meal, yet the supply could not fully match Canada's role and the nutritional profile was not identical. Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan brought some oil and seed to the table, but inconsistent quality and transport risks kept them from filling the gap. Faced with these limits, China leaned harder on soybeans, increasing imports for both oil and meal, but this raised costs and created new dependencies. The picture is clear. China can diversify, but none of its options provide the same scale, consistency, and reliability that Canada had offered for decades. That imbalance explains why compromise is not only possible but likely. Canadian canola once supplied about a quarter of China's import needs, and cutting it off entirely has already strained feed markets, especially aquaculture and livestock. Substituting soybeans and palm oil can help in the short term, yet neither can replace the mix of oil and protein that canola provides. The Ministry of Commerce's decision in September to extend its anti-dumping probe by 6 months, pushing the deadline to March 9, 2026, underlines the point. It buys time, but it also signals that Beijing is leaving the door open to negotiation. For Canada, the strategy is to hold steady, expand biofuel demand at home, and build ties with trusted partners abroad. For China, the cost of insisting on maximum pressure may outweigh the benefits. In the end, the dispute over canola illustrates a larger truth. In a world of shifting alliances and contested trade flows, leverage is never absolute. Both countries need each other, and sooner or later, that reality will come back to the table.